Okay, so welcome back, and it's good to be back. And today we're going to talk about Ezekiel chapter 4 to 10. The challenge now for our lesson today and subsequent lessons is the amount of text. For me to sit up here and read, 6 chapters of Ezekiel, well, it would take up our entire hour. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit highlights. I did send in my email and asked you to pre-read it if possible, and it's always good to do that. If you're coming here, I'll try to give you an idea of what we're doing. But if you have pre-read it, it's to your advantage. But if you haven't, we'll at least have an exposure to it enough so that we can glean kind of what's going on. Because as we've heard so far, and I'm just even scanning Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel. So just you kind of got the idea that already the book of Ezekiel and God's relation to His people is something that, people would tend to avoid or minimize, because the Lord towards Ezekiel, the paradigmatic exile, and therefore his people, is very, very harsh. It's extremely harsh. But we have discussed already, and we will be discussing again, there's reasons behind him being so harsh. We don't want to hear that. We want the Jesus that's got surrounded by children and all that stuff. That's the Jesus we want. But we have to understand that we want the total Christ. We want the total picture of God. Because usually what happens is if we come with an idea of who Jesus is and who God is, and we don't allow for the scripture to speak, then we create an idol or a caricature of God. And it's as I've said, that becomes an idol. And so we have to sit here and accept what is being written to us. So Chapter 4, first of all, let me give you some preliminary comments. The last time we met, one of the last things we discussed is that God meets Ezekiel in a spot, a bikah, which is a very insignificant, it would be like a mini oasis. It'd be so insignificant, you could not sustain much life there. It might be a little bit of a place of water in the desert, but it could not support, a community or a people. It's just a spot, just a little brook. I don't know. But the idea of a spot, especially in the midst of mountains, is that it's a very low place, and this is a scriptural way of saying that God is not going to meet you where you typically would meet Him. Would you meet your deities on mountains? Anything high. This God meets you low. First of all, He puts you low. We're going to find that out today. And that's where He meets you. Because that's, I believe, where He can speak to us. We need to be down, and we talked about that. Then He can work with us. Then He can talk to us. So this low place is a dig against anything high and exalted. And we've said already that that's why Ezekiel is always called the Son of Man. He's not allowed to congratulate himself for being a prophet, and if you asked him, he would not do that at all. We also find out, and will find out, that Ezekiel is totally controlled by God's Spirit, and the last time we talked at the end of 3, to a point where he cannot warn his fellow exiles unless God lets him. So it's like Ezekiel has all this information, but he cannot tell the exiles that this is coming. That's at the end of 3. The Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet, so there's a total control. He spoke to me and said, "Go shut yourself inside your house, and you, son of man, they will tie you with ropes, and you will be bound so that you cannot go among the people. I will make your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth." So he's completely subject, not only to God, but to the exiles. He can't say anything. So he's totally under control, which tells you something, and I'm going to be talking about this. So we also talked about, and will be talking about, the idea that God punishes by allowing his people to bear their own guilt. That way, it's a double strike. Number one, you punish your people, your children, but at the same time, the children cannot turn around and say, you did this to me. Right? No, God's going to say, no, you did it to yourself. And I gave you warning. This is no surprise to anybody. It's not like I give you my decrees, I give you my laws, statutes, and ordinances. If you don't follow, and I've told you if you don't follow them, there's trouble. He did that in Deuteronomy. And Exodus. And Genesis. Gosh, let's just go right back to the beginning. There's always a command with a warning and a forecast associated with it. So of course, when they break that commandment, they're the ones who are responsible. So that is a theme throughout. Now, as you've already heard, and we will hear again, that Ezekiel is one who also bears the punishment. And I've said this already, he's one of the people. But the difference is that Ezekiel, and this is a key point, he gives the meaning to what is happening. So he takes the guesswork out of it, essentially. He's not allowed to separate himself, and I'd like to say this, there's no clericalism with Ezekiel. He's not allowed to separate himself on being the side of God and telling everybody everything and warning. He's not allowed to be, he has to be subject to the same thing. The only difference is, so in other words, he's a recipient of God's judgment, but he gives the meaning behind it. So, I guess, is ignorance bliss? Perhaps, I don't know. But he gives the meaning behind what is being delivered and why it's being delivered. So, if we just start reading a little bit here in chapter 4, it says, "Now you, son of man, take a clay tablet, put it in front of you and draw the city of Jerusalem on it. Then lay siege to it, erect siege works against it, build a ramp up to it, set up camps against it, put battering rams around it. Then take an iron pan, place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and turn your face toward it. It will be under siege, and you shall besiege it. This will be a sign to the house of Israel. Then lie on your left side and put out the sin of the house of Israel upon yourself. You are to bear their sin for the number of days you lie on your side. I have assigned to you the same number of days as the years of their sin. So for 390 days you will bear the sin of the house of Israel." And then later he goes for the house of Judah 40 days. Now don't be confused. I remember saying this, I think when I was at Robertson Wesley. As with Hebrew and Greek, most often with Hebrew, but even with Greek, it's if you're looking at words, it's the consonants that carry the meaning, not the vowels. But with numbers, it's the numbers and not the zeros that carry the meaning. So 390 is actually a lower number than 40. See? Because of this. Now here I'm counting the zero, but because of this.
Yeah, but don't you count the 0 and the 40 as well?
Well, you can, I'm making an illustration though, I mean a very good point. But if I keep it to 2, okay, this actually is a lower number. The point is, and again, but this is actually 4 times 10, and there's a whole numerology understanding behind that. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's showing that, in a manner of speaking, Judah is more indictable than Israel, because Israel, 390 days, is a little bit less than, I'll put in quotations, 40, at least how do I say this? Goodness. Numerologically, according to the Hebrew numerology. Because don't forget that, I'm going to go ahead in Ezekiel now. Judah, this is Judah, and this is Israel. Judah is said to be the worst of all the sisters. Because there's 3 sisters. There's Judah, Israel, and Sodom.
Judah's worse than Sodom?
That's according to the book of Ezekiel later on. Absolutely. Chapters 20 for sure. I'm trying to remember the chapters, but you can look at it when we get there. You'll see. Oh yeah, this is the worst. So you see that Israel was bad. This, remember, number 4 is totality. 4 directions, 4 walls.
Yeah.
10 is a value of a number. It adds volume. This actually, if you were an Israelite or an exile hearing this, you'd pick this up right away. You'd pick this up right away because you'd know this is a belittling of Judah. And who are these exiles? They're Jerusalemites, which is in Judah. Belittling below, and don't forget the Judahites despised Israel because Israel were the 10 lost tribes, etc., and they scattered and intermingled with the Assyrians, and then you have the Samaritans, right? So again, they're bad, these guys are worse. So here, but I want to say this, because I'm not going to read all of chapter 4, I'm just going to read snippets. He's got to be assigned to Israel, but he's got to act it out. And now I want to ask a question to anybody and everybody here, and in the my TV audience, which is, it ain't sizable, but, well, you know what I need, Herb, is an eraser, so eventually, I just don't see him in here. Oh, a napkin.
Sorry, there's paper.
Oh.
Yeah, under you put the bottom.
Yes. Who wants to be a prophet here? I mean, how many people? We tend to, I mean, first of all, what I'm about to say is not meant to be derogatory or accusatory. But it's very tempting to, when we hear the language of preachers, sermons, other types of teachings in the Christian churches, let's put it that way, it tends to do the opposite of what's happening in Ezekiel, and that's to soft pedal the bad part of us and uplift us and comfort us with God's love for us. I mean, we've talked about this already. But my challenge, and how I'm challenged by this text, is very simply, if I am going to be a messenger of God or a prophet of God of some sort or any kind of representative of God, actually, I must be insane. Because if you read Ezekiel, you'll find out very quickly that that's what you get. Because who wants to be St. Paul? I mean, St. Paul's a very famous saint. But, and we think about, Paul, his letters, his life, his robustness, his determination, his faith. But we don't think about the fact that he was despised and scorned and beaten and left for dead and whipped, and we don't look at that. That's the point here, is Ezekiel, oh yeah, he's a prophet. But we have to keep in mind that if we want to be like that, if we want to be God's representatives here, we have to expect that if we're following that path truly, and if it is truly our path, that's why Jesus says in the Gospel of Mark, you will have 100-fold with persecutions. It's impossible to get out of it. Does that make sense? So, now, reading on, I'm just going to skip here. You get this idea where he talks about, again, I'm skipping now quite a bit. Well, skipping, or that's not the word I'm using. I am going to be glossing. This chapter 4, verse 9, where he talks about take certain elements and make them into cakes and cook them on human excrement. And then Ezekiel says, God forbid, I've never, broken the law, etc., etc. Okay, well, you can cook it on cow's excrement. Now, what does that tell you, by the way? I want to ask somebody, what does that little bit tell you?
I would to get from that some of the laws that they were following were pointless. God was trying to say to them, my laws are the most important. Okay. So whether you cook it on human or
Yeah.
paddle instrument, doesn't really matter.
Okay, you're that's pretty close to gold star. I like that. I mean, and this is what I was thinking too, because really you've got nearly what I was thinking is that really the centrality of the law is underscored here in a number of ways, and I think you've picked it up. That and we talked about that last time. The centrality of the law is paramount. Does everybody understand what I mean when I say that? Let me explain. Well, there's two ways of going this way. Number one, you're being punished for not following the law, so therefore you have to eat your cakes on human dung, which points to centrality, that you're having to be debased this much because you didn't do that, which makes that the subject matter. Makes the law the subject matter. The other way that I was thinking was that while I'm thinking about this, does anybody know in the book of Acts what this sounds similar to? While I'm thinking.
Isn't it the passage where Peter has that sheep?
Exactly.
Part of our readings.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, we spoke about
That was our message today too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
This must be okay. Again, I'm not sure if that underscores what I'm trying to say because for some reason it's escaped me the other reason why I apologize.
Well,
Typical.
just-
What did you have in mind, Herb?
Well, the point I was trying to make was
Yeah.
that when Jesus came, the Pharisees had created the law into a system of autocracy, where they determined how everyone else was going to live, and they made the burden so heavy that many people could not bear it or couldn't carry it. And Jesus came in and said, no. I'm not come to destroy the law or the prophets came to fulfill, and the two things that you fulfill, the law, is love the Lord thy God with all your heart and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all along the prophets. So what God was trying to do was trying to show the Israelites that their little regulations and all these little things that they had by which they laid burdens on a number of people were pointless, and that what was most important was what God said was his law.
Well, but God gave those laws, though.
Yes, of course. But you know yourself that the Pharisees and the people of the lawyers and the legalists and so on took it so far that it became too much of a burden for so many people to bear.
Yeah, I mean this is a long discussion, but
Yeah, I understand.
I think let's read further ahead because the centrality of the law, and it'll probably come to me when I'm driving home, which is so typical. Let's keep going. I apologize for that. It's just escaped me for some reason.
Well, I'm curious that why is eating a barley cake the same as eating defiled food?
Well, that would take me to go back and look at that. Well, it's not that. It's the defilement is not the barley; it's cooking it in human excrement that defiles it. But I'm going to keep going, and I'm hoping some of this will iron out. If not, of course, I can get back to you. So he said, verse 16, then he said to me, Son of man, I will cut off the supply of food in Jerusalem. The people eat ration food in anxiety and drink ration water in despair, for food and water will be scarce. They will be appalled at the sight of each other and will waste away because of their sin. Now, this is what I want to say about this, because one thing about famine, if you're reading scripture, your best does not, how do I put this? This is what we think famine is. But I'm going to propose that that is not the issue. Famine in the Bible equals just to finish my The true famine is not for bread. It's for the words of the Lord,
The bread of life.
which is the bread of life. Yeah, that's John 6. Now, I'm giving you this at the beginning because I want you to start watching for this. And this you'll find also very explicitly said in, I think, in the book of Amos, for example. People will be going hither and thither looking not for bread, but for the words of the Lord. And then, of course, you have Deuteronomy, and Jesus quoting Deuteronomy, man does not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So, again, the basic metaphor of punishment of the people is expressed typically as siege, and that's why siege equals famine. Let's see, there's 4 of them. Sword, sickness, and exile. And that is the basic metaphor of punishment. So as I'm saying, the striking thing here is the fact that hunger for bread is the principal metaphor for perpetual life. Bread is symbolic for God's words, commandments. So we should not imagine physical hunger here. And don't imagine physical hunger. In fact, we would probably do much better if we eliminated that.
The spiritual hunger.
I'm not even going to accept that.
Okay.
Because that could mean, well, okay, I'll accept it as long as we understand that spirit is the spirited word of God. Because God only knows what spirit means nowadays. I mean, St. Paul is very emphatic.
I only know the one spirit. I don't know the other spirit.
Well, I'll prove it to you. This is what St. Paul, in a very sort of interesting way in the book of Romans, how he manages to belittle's too strong a word, where he manages to flatten everybody. He says, in Romans 1 verse 14, I am obligated to both Greeks, and it says non-Greeks, but if I recall, the word is barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. That is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel, also to you who are at Rome. Now, I don't know if you understand and detect how skilled he is, but he's basically saying, if you don't know the gospel, you're all on the same level no matter who you are. You could be a slave, you could be a Roman patrician. In the Roman world, you are definitely miles apart. The Roman patrician owned many slaves. But when it comes to the gospel, if the Roman patrician doesn't know the gospel and a slave does, the slave is higher. But the key phrase here is he says, that's why I'm also eager to come to you in Rome. He's putting his gospel above anybody in Rome. It's the gospel that has precedence. So I would say, this is my proposal to you. You can, as I said, take it or leave it. That the food that we have to give the world, God bless anybody who feeds the poor. And I mean that. And I'm not talking about singing for your supper about what I'm about to say. But the real food we have to give people is the gospel. Actually, that should be our number one concern. Number one concern is give them the gospel. Give them the words of life. And this is what Ezekiel's all about.
So if I may ask a question, or interject a question, just
Please.
for a thought. Where does, I know the gospel is above Maslow's hierarchy of need, but is there some validity, is there some reality? We can preach to people until we're blue in the face, but if they're hungry, guess what? they're not gonna care.
That's why I'm not singing. I'm not talking about singing for your supper.
Sure.
I'm just saying in our minds, the greatest gift that we can give to people is the gospel.
Absolutely.
And we shouldn't, again, I'm not talking about ramming down people's throats. We have to have a skilled way of delivering it. But it is the true food.
Even when we supply physical needs, it still has to be
Yeah.
as a way to bring
It's
people
the
to
subject
gospel.
matter.
Yes.
It's the words of life. It is what actually gives life. So let's go to chapter 5, because again, I don't want to be, I have to do a bit of a hit parade here. There's no way around it. So now he talks about taking a sharp sword and use it, your barber's razor, to shave your head and your beard. Shaving is shameful because a sign of dignity was hair and beards at that time. So he's telling him to shave and take all your hair and move it around the city, etc., etc. And that's at the beginning of 5. And then he says in verse 5, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. This is Jerusalem, which I have set in the center of the nations, with countries all around her. Yet in her wickedness she has rebelled against my laws and decrees more than the nations and countries around her. She has rejected my laws and has not followed my decrees." If you want to underline any verse in the Bible, do that one. Because that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. This is the real problem. Now, see, okay. We'll get to this. I don't want to jump too much ahead, but trust me when I say this. This is the real problem. This puts front and center the law of God. This is your life, in other words. Non-compliance towards the commandments and ordinances of God is a problem. And then it says, later on, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, "You've been more unruly than the nations around you, and have not followed my decrees or kept my laws. You have not even conformed to the standards of the nations around you. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I myself am against you, Jerusalem, and I will inflict punishment on you in the sight of the nations. Because of all your detestable idols, I will do to you what I have never done before and will never do again." And then he talks about some really interesting, well, very, he talks about fathers eating their children, etc., etc. The whole idea is that they're devouring each other. "I will inflict punishment on you and scatter your survivors to the winds. Therefore, surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because you have defiled my sanctuary and with all your vile images and detestable practices, I myself will withdraw my favor. I will not look on you with pity or spare you." And then he talks about the people being scattered. "Then my anger will cease and my wrath against them will subside and I will be avenged." So the idea, again, we talked about a judge, right? A judge is one who, the judge doesn't inflict the punishment or do anything. He just gives the decree. This happens in court. The judge says guilty and you have a bailiff and officers doing the job for him. It's no different. It's just that this God uses the other nations to do that to his people. Okay? You will be a reproach and a taunt, I'm in verse 15, a warning and an object of horror to the nations around you when I inflict punishment on you in anger and in wrath with striking rebuke. I, the Lord, have spoken. When I shoot you with my deadly and destructive arrows of famine, I will shoot to destroy you. I will bring you more and more famine upon you and cut off your supply of food. I will send famine and wild beasts against you. They will leave you childless. Plague and bloodshed will sweep through you, and I will bring a sword against you. I, the Lord, have spoken. Now, the only thing I want to say about this, other than what seems obvious, is that you get the idea, and I've said this before, that God is extremely harsh with his people. And you're going to find out, actually, as we read. It's unbelievable what he comes up with. He is harsh because he wants to make sure that the survivors of this are going to know and understand that when they're brought back, they don't have another chance. So this is their, remember, this is their second, I mean, can you imagine if one of my daughters runs out into the street and she gets this close to getting hit by a car, and I sharply rebuke her for chasing that ball. Let's face it. This is a few years ago. I mean, they're smarter than that, trust me. Should that happen again, there's a good chance they won't survive. Now, am I being harsh? Am I being unnecessarily harsh if I really am emphatic with them? You know, I don't know. Send them to a room for a week, and I don't know, I'm just making stuff up now, but you get the point. It may seem harsh, but because the implication of what's happening to them is so severe, in other words, they could die, I have to be harsh. And that's exactly what God's doing. I'm just giving you an example. It may seem harsh, and this is, people read this and they go, oh my God, you know. And that's what led Marcion, by the way, in the early church to reject the Old Testament. Marcion was a churchman who rejected the Old Testament because he says this God is an ogre God who just wants to punish people all the time. And I want the Father of Jesus, and the God of the Old Testament is not the Father of Jesus. And today we are functional Marcionites because we don't read the Old Testament.
Would desperate measures for desperate times be?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But, you know, I mean, really, this is what should be sort of in your mind, without being too soft on this, you know what I mean, of what's going on. Because remember, as we read on, he's going to hold a few back and send them back, but there's no second chance.
Yeah.
You screw up there, It's chapter 6. Let me just see here if I've got everything.
Would there be a parallel here at all between, in verse 9, chapter 5, verse 9, I will do to you what I've never done before and will never do again. That sort of popped out to me. It was sort of like an echo of the flood. You know.
And why not? Because the whole Pentateuch, actually the rest of the Old Testament, is a flowering of the prophets. Absolutely, I like that. I say you're really catching on to what I believe is how things function here. That's basically it. It's just like a strong, strong rebuke. You know, and looking at the flood, and if for anybody who's ever seen or heard my Genesis talk, I mean, really, it's God the one who is the one who ends up swallowing everything. He's the one who has to put up with us. That's forbearance, by the way. Let's go to chapter 6. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against the mountains of Israel, prophesy against them and say, O mountains of Israel, hear the word of the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to the mountains and hills, to the ravines and valleys, and that ravines and valleys are there to accentuate the mountains, right? Make them high. I'm about to bring a sword against you, and I'll destroy your high places. Your altars will be demolished, and your incense altars will be smashed. And I will slay your people in front of your idols. I will lay dead bodies of the Israelites in front of their idols, and I will scatter your bones around the altars. Wherever you live, the towns will be laid waste and high places demolished, so that your altars will be laid waste and devastated, your idols smashed and ruined, and incense altars broke down. What you have wiped out, your people will fall slain among you, and you will know that I am the Lord. Now, but I will spare some. Now, this is a key verse here. For some of you will escape the sword when you are scattered among the lands and nations. Then in the nations where they have been carried captive, those who escape will remember me. How I have been grieved by their adulterous hearts, which have turned away from me, and by their eyes, which they have lusted after idols. They will loathe themselves for the evil they have done, and for all their detestable practices they will know that I am the Lord. I did not threaten in vain to bring this calamity upon them. I'm just going to read the rest of the chapter, if that's okay. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Strike your hands together and stamp your feet and cry out, Alas, because of all the wicked and detestable practices of the house of Israel, for they will fall by the sword, famine, and plague. Sword, famine, plague, sickness. He that is far away will die of the plague. He that is near will fly by the sword, and he that survives the spirit will die by famine. So I will spend my wrath upon them, and they will know that I am the Lord, when their people lie slain among their idols, around their altars on every high hill and all the mountain tops, under every spreading tree and every leafy oak, places where they offered fragrant incense to all their idols. And I will stretch out my hand against them and make the land desolate, waste from the desert of Diblah, wherever they live. Then they will know I am the Lord. The key issue here. First of all, what are mountains? Mountains are two things. They're high, so it's a sign of arrogance. But the other thing is that's where idols are placed, high places. And
Mountains are also burial.
Sorry?
Mountains are also a barrier too. Back in those days, they were.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they are. But I mean, functionally in this text, it's a high place, and that's where they were offering their worship to their idols. But so it's a sign of arrogance. But the verse I wanted to point out is verse 9. Look at verse 9. Then in the nations where they have been carried captive, those who escape will remember me, how I have been grieved by their adulterous hearts which have turned away from me, and by their eyes which they have lusted after idols. They will loathe themselves for the evil they have done, for all their detestable practices. You see, there's this, we read this regularly, Psalm 51. Psalm 51. There's a text which is very often misunderstood, and I'm going to hopefully clarify it. Psalm 51 is the repentance of David. It says, verse 17, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Now I know when people hear that, they think, if my heart is broken, God will not despise me. That's not what it means. He's the one that has to break your heart. You don't break your own heart. You don't break your own heart, because you ain't going to break it the way he's going to break it. Trust me on that.